Hello and welcome to another episode of Thoughts Per Episode Classic Doctor Who. Today we are taking a look at the six-part episode. We're going to be taking a look at all six parts of The Keys of Marinus. For some reason when I read this title a few weeks ago I thought it would be a historical adventure, but it sounds like it's not. It sounds more sci-fi. The Doctor appears to be landing on somewhere in a lake surrounded by acid. So let's see what's going on there. Before we start though, I do want to mention that if you are wondering where the episode between Marinus and Edge of Destruction is, that would be Marco Polo. Unfortunately it's not on BritBox. It's probably one of those episodes that's been lost to time and has not been animated, or at least if it has been animated it's not on BritBox, because I'm just doing what's on BritBox. So apologies, but if you do want to hear my vague thoughts on the synopsis of that episode, I put it on the end of the Edge of Destruction episode, so you can go and listen to that there. The Keys of Marinus Part 1. The Sea of Death. The TARDIS lands on a remote island surrounded by a sea of acid and are set a task. Similar to the Daleks' first episode, I'm struck by the fact that this is some proper good sci-fi. To a point, it's almost the kind of thing you would expect to see in a modern Doctor Who episode, right? The TARDIS lands and it's in a strange environment, and there's this mystery about things don't look the way they normally would, like we've got a sea of acid and a beach of glass, and then there's a mysterious person, and then there's like one faction which is attacking that person as well, and like he's the last of his race and he's got this, you know, futuristic machine that he's trying to fix and stuff like this, and he turns out to be kind of a bad guy but not entirely. Like, I think at some point we're going to see the Vord, like, their perspective and see why they are who they are and stuff like that. The priest guy is trying to get this machine which, if I heard right, can like mind control the Vord to stop them from trying to invade and stop him from basically trying to activate this machine. I think it's quite clear that the Vord are like, yeah, we don't want to be mind controlled, obviously. Again, we've got the establishing shot being like a macro shot of like a clearly a prop of the environment. It looked convincing until they zoomed right in, and then a tiny little toy TARDIS appears on the little diorama beach there. It's adorable. I'm guessing on an old contemporary black and white telly, though you probably couldn't tell, right? I do like at one point Barbara mentions to the Doctor it's a pity that you don't have colour television in regards to the scanner of showing them what's outside. I love this idea that the Doctor's futuristic tech can't do colour telly. He does mention that he does have it, but I actually didn't hear what he said because he kind of mumbled it under his breath. I guess it's on the fritz or something. Of course, in canon lore you could argue that it's highly probable that he just adapted the inside of his TARDIS to suit the time period that he had settled into in the event that someone wandered in or something, or that he took on people from that era. But I mean, kind of wandering into a spaceship kind of destroys the whole, you know, contemporary technology argument in the first place. I don't know. I noticed the Doctor's walking around using a cane here, and I can't for the life of me remember if he did that in previous episodes, if maybe the reason I'm surprised to see him doing so is because his cane gets taken away from him by like the Daleks and the cavemen and stuff, or if this is a new addition and if it's for William Hartnell's sake or if it's just for the character's prop sake. It doesn't really matter, just something I noticed here. I like that Susan almost loses a foot to the acid pool. That's a, well, I'm not going to say a big yikes because we have a yikes meter for an entirely different reason, but that's a big eee. Although they very much push her wanting to go for a swim right from the start of the episode. It's just like, yeah, I get it, you're trying to establish the acid water, I get it. But it's not like back in the day you could bring up a TV guide and read the synopsis and find out that it was going to be an acid ocean before you actually got to that point in the episode, right? So my complaint is purely, well, it's not even a complaint, but my comment's kind of a non-comment there. I found it very refreshing that they're approaching this as adventurers now who want to go out and see what's going on with the place, much like the Doctor did in the Daleks episode. Now it's not like he's dragging them along and they're constantly arguing with him every step of the way. Now it's more like more like the kind of Doctor Who that I'm used to, where it's just a group of people who are like, huh, what's up with this place? Let's go and find out. Susan immediately breaks rule 1 of not wandering off, but I don't think rule 1 exists yet. I found it funny when Susan leaned against a wall and it turned around and she fell inside and screamed. That was funny. Meanwhile, when it happens to the Doctor, you don't hear a goddamn sound. He just goes with the flow. I like to imagine he just popped up on the other side and was like, oh, hi. So the aliens in like the scuba diving suits are called the Vord, right? There's a scene where one of them attacks the priest dude and Ian comes and saves him and pushes him against a wall. The priest dude presses a button, the wall flips, the guy falls to his death, and it cuts to a shot of obviously a prop of like a small toy figure man falling into a small tub of acid going, ah! Like, oh my god, that's the biggest laugh this series has gotten out of me so far. As for the whole conscience of Marinus thing, because Marinus is the name of a planet, it sounds like it was originally created to be like a judge AI, which had like quote-unquote perfect judgment, which is quite dystopian in and of itself, but then they kind of kept upgrading it, and to the point where it could make decisions for the people of Marinus, so they wouldn't have to think for themselves, basically, which is extremely dystopian, and I'm assuming we're going to be hearing a lot more about that. And when he was describing it as well, I was like, oh, this priest guy, who I don't know what to call him, so I'm just calling him a priest guy because he looks and acts a bit like a priest venerating this machine. I was immediately like, oh, he's sus, he's the bad guy. And it did not take long for him to show his true colours, because of course when the group go back to the TARDIS, because they're not a fam yet, so I don't know what to call them, a gang, a group, a bunch. When I go back to the TARDIS, they find a force field, but they don't call it a force field, which makes me think it's from a time before we were using the term force field in science fiction. He does call it a force barrier. I also found it interesting that he mentioned it would of course have to be kind of spherical, because if it had hard edges, you know, it would have seams at which they could probably hammer on it and try to break it. And I found that interesting purely for a personal reason. That is something which has recently come up in a book I'm reading, in a Wheel of Time book, of a kind of psychic barrier which very much had the same feel to it, for the very same reasons. If it had hard edges, which at times it did, the character in question would be able to break through the psychic barrier and use their magical powers, for want of a better term. I'm not going to get into Wheel of Time lore in this episode, sorry. I just like seeing repeated ideas like that. I'm like, oh, I've seen this before. I mean, they're drawing from physics, right? Like, if something has hard edges and it's a barrier, it's easier to break. They're just applying that to a force field or a psychic barrier or whatever. It's not important, Christian. Move on. I found it interesting that once again the priest mentions that his race died to the Vord due to their pacifism. So again, we're having a takedown of pacifism in this episode, very similarly to in the Daleks episode. I feel like this is a theme which is going to come up a lot in Terry Nation's storylines, because if I remember, Terry Nation also wrote the Daleks episode. One slight small thing, I like how the Doctor approves of these teleportation bracelets, but thousands of years from now, when he meets Captain Jack Harkness, he's going to compare that kind of travel to, you know, his TARDIS is a race car and the wrist teleportation thing is a space hopper. But to be fair, this one can't travel through time, so maybe he just approves when it's teleportation instead of actual time travel, who knows. Also, I love how when they teleport, you just hear like a little pop sound. And then at the end of this episode, the priest gets stabbed. Jeez. Right on telly as well, you hate to see it. And we find out that Barbara, because they've taken so long to catch up to Barbara with her teleportation devices, that she's been taken, and that there is blood on the teleportation wristwatch thing that she's left on the ground. You know, I'm starting to think that this whole no wandering off rule came from a good place. I think it came from a place of experience. The Keys of Marinus Part 2, The Velvet Web. In the city of Morpherton, the Doctor, Barbara, Ian and Susan are welcomed as guests. This episode was really interesting because it felt like an entire single adventure by itself. And I'm guessing that's what the Keys of Marinus story is. I'm guessing it's like, oh, we go to this place and we see this, and then we go to this place and then we see this, and then we go here and we see this, and it all kind of like links back to the main story. It's a bit like a video game in that way. I actually thought this at the end of the first episode of this story, where he was talking about how he's got 4 different keys in different locations and they must go to these locations and find them. It sounds like the plot of a video game. Anyway, the episode starts when the gang, I guess, catch up to Barbara, and they find that she is very quickly acclimatized to this lovely area where she's being treated like a queen, basically. Someone's feeding her grapes, she's got servants, there's like beds all around, there's lavish furniture, and I'm not criticizing Barbara or anything, but like, I feel like the servants would be a dead giveaway, that them telling me that they have this society where everyone gets exactly what they want probably isn't the truth. Ian's a little bit skeptical, I'll give him that, but Barbara actually kind of redeems herself throughout the course of this episode. Like, through pure chance, the thing that they put on her forehead to try and brainwash her doesn't work, because like most people, she doesn't sleep facing straight up towards the ceiling the entire time. She rolls over in her sleep, so it comes falling off her head. You think they'd attach a bit of glue to them or something, right? But yes, it turns out that this entire civilization is run by these 3 brains, or 4 I think, brains in jars, and they're actually really effective as villains. They look really creepy, and they have these imperious voices. You can totally tell that they've been created by the same mind behind the Daleks, and they use this device called a mesmer to basically brainwash people into serving them, and they trick people into becoming their servants by at first showing them that they can have anything that they want. I found it striking when they asked the Doctor what he wanted, what his heart's desire was. He's just like, I don't know really. A lab. I would like a lab, you know, that kind of thing. I found that striking because I'm so used to this version of a Doctor which has generations worth of grief within him. Like the 9th and 10th Doctor would be like, my heart's desire would be Gallifrey, you know. Obviously I don't think he would actually reply with that, but you know, if he was being honest with himself. And then 11, I don't know what 11 would be, maybe Amy and Rory back if we're at a certain point in his generation, in his lifespan. I'm so used to the Doctor being this tragic figure with lots of haunting loss inside of him that when he's asked what his heart's desire is, and obviously he has none of that, at least none that's portrayed in this episode, like, you could say, oh well, you know, the fact that he's a grandfather means he probably has like another half that he no longer is with, or he has kids that he no longer sees and stuff like that. I don't think that ever gets explored to the best of my knowledge. I think I remember searching for it once. Maybe it does later. I would be very interested if it is, but I've never heard anyone talk about that. But yeah, as an aside, that's just something that struck me. Like, every now and again I'm reminded, oh right, this is the first Doctor. Apart from all of the Jodie Whittaker rewriting of canon stuff, which we'll get to it, but I guess as far as early talking about the first Doctor goes, I'm open-minded to it, okay? I don't think it was handled particularly well, but I'm open-minded to it. I'm not just gonna poo-poo it out of hand. Anyway, back to the episode. When Barbara wakes up, we get this really interesting shot from her perspective of Ian, Susan and the Doctor standing over her and looking at her, and you can see that the kind of environment behind them is different. And it's at this point we have this wonderful realization that, oh, everything's been an illusion, and like they offer her a cup of something to drink and she says it's a dirty cup with horrible fetid water in and stuff like that. Susan shows her the dress that's being made for her, which we saw moments before as a really elegant dress, and now we see it as rags in her hands. It's really effective and really well done. And then we have Barbara on the run. She finds out that one of the serving girls is Arbitan's daughter, and yes, I've caught on to the fact that that priest character I was talking about before is called Arbitan. We see no more of him, by the way. We saw that he got stabbed at the end of last episode. We don't see anything more from him or the Vord. But eventually she escapes and runs into Ian, who has been brainwashed to the point of being told to kill her, and he actually does try to strangle her, but luckily Barbara fucking overpowers him like the A+ tier character that she is, and then she goes and smashes up the Mesmer machine and she uses it to kill the brains in jars. And I do like that we got an aside of like, oh, the city is in uprising and all of this after that happens. The episode wraps up fairly quickly after that, with the Doctor deciding to go many teleportations ahead, so they're gonna split up, and the episode ends when Susan enters the screaming jungle. Yeah, okay, sure. Before moving on, I do just want to add that I think it's no coincidence that the conscience of Marinus has the ability to brainwash people, and so did this civilization with the Mesmer. I think, I don't know if it's going to actually link together in terms of the story of like, oh, they got the same technology as us for whatever reason. I think it's mostly going to be used as like the characters using their experiences to make the right decision at the end of this story based on what they've seen in places like, oh god, what was this place called again? It was very one and done, so I don't remember. The Keys of Marinus, chapter... Hang on a minute, I've got a new microphone, haven't I? Hello, I should probably address that. Got a new microphone, so I sound a bit different now. I've also got a bit of a cold, so that's also probably not going to help. Anyway, The Keys of Marinus, chapter... something. The Screaming Jungle. Ian and Barbara find a temple in the jungle. Inside is Darius, keeper of one of the keys. This episode felt less like a self-contained adventure like the last episode did, and more like just a chapter within The Keys of Marinus. So my kind of... while it's still like its own self-contained little we're in this location, and then in the next episode we're going to be in the next location, I don't think it stands on its own quite as much. So my theory about it all being kind of standalone episodes is half correct, but I don't know if that's what they were going for. This episode is also quite a bit more basic than the previous one. Like, the premise is basically just they're in a jungle that's very overgrown and will continue to grow and try to kill them at nighttime. And for some reason it screams when it grows. I don't think they ever explained that part, but I'm just realising that now. Susan finds the Osterhagen key, the key of Marinus that they need, promptly gets kidnapped by a statue with arms which are definitely arms that belong to a statue and not a human being sat within the statue. Like, they have like the little noise to try and make it seem more statue-like, but it's straight up just some dude inside of there. They find out that the key of Marinus was a fake! Dun dun dun! And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that whole little thing about the key being fake, that was just used to get the others to leave, so this could be a primarily Ian and Barbara episode, wasn't it? Anyway, Ian decides to go through the statue as well, which is never really explained, it's just kind of there, and then they find a bunch of booby traps set by a man named Darius. He wants them to prove that they were sent by the Arbitan dude, so they show him their teleporter watches, and then he promptly gets choked to death by a vine, except he gets let go, and then he just crawls to his bed, and then he just kind of dies dramatically there. Not really helpfully telling them exactly where the key is, but instead giving them a cryptic clue, because where would the rest of the episode be if that wasn't the case? They go to his room where his stuff is. His lab? His lab. That's what that's called, Christian. It's a lab. They go to his lab, find out it's obviously not in the vault, it's in one of the jars labelled with one of the combination things he mentioned, and they escape just in time as the plants overgrow and almost overwhelm them. And that's it. That's the episode. It's a little bit naff, if I'm honest. The plants growing in and trying to kill them are very much just people pushing props from off-screen, and it's never very convincing, like when the vine stretches itself over Susan's leg and she ends up screaming. It doesn't look like it's constricting her legs or anything. It literally just lays on top of her, and then she's like, ah! You know, as she does. It's very budget classic Who and made me laugh. But yeah, that's about it for this episode, so on to the next one, I guess, where it's looking to be very cold indeed. The keys of... Oh, hang on a minute, I should probably let you know I've got a pop filter now, so I sound even better. After recording the last session, I listened back to it and I was like, oh, that was a little bit painful, so I apologise for that. You won't have to listen to any more unfiltered me. I mean, you'll hear unfiltered me, but more in like the metaphorical sense, you know? The Keys of Marinus Part 4, The Snows of Terror. In a snowy wasteland, Vaser, an unscrupulous trapper, imprisons the travellers. That's a very weird revelation, because I could have sworn his name was Basil. I could have sworn they were calling him Basil, but apparently he's called Vaser? Okay, sure. He's called Vaser. In this episode, Ian and Barbara end up in a frozen wasteland of a sort, and they are going to freeze to death when they are rescued by a man called Vaser, as we just established. Vaser, who's definitely called Basil, takes him to his home, and he seems like a really lovely, friendly chap, until he turns out not to be. And I suppose the first red flag should have been when he said, "Do you fear me? Last year I broke the back of a wolf with my bare hands. I don't get many visitors anymore." My one issue with this guy is he was acting as such a kind-hearted dude for the first bit of it, that it was, like, legit. I thought he was a real kind-hearted dude, and then when he turned out to be a creep, he just acted as this malicious creep for the rest of the time. It's such like an old-fashioned character switch, but then I guess I shouldn't be criticising a 1963 show for being old-fashioned. That's all this series is, isn't it? It's just me going, wow, this was old-fashioned. Oh wait, yeah, it was old. The next red flag was when he was, Ian went off to go and find what's-his-face, the vaguely Roman-looking dude, and Barbara sat down for, I guess, tea with him, and he was just like, that door will keep anything out. Or in. What are you doing at that drawer? I do like how this tied into the previous episode in a way that Susan and that other girl whose name I've forgotten went on ahead, and that element of them going on ahead is now being used in this episode because they've got to go and find them. It's just I think it's neat. I just think it's neat. Marge Simpson dot gif. I also thought it was a nice little touch that the way you kill a man isn't by like killing him with your own two hands, it's by giving him a bag full of raw meat and sending him out into a frozen wasteland full of wolves. Very super villain of you. Or actually more like classic cartoon villain. Supervillain plots tend to be less convoluted now that the MCU is a thing and it's kind of normalised supervillains in media. Quick question, by the way, why are there wolves on an alien world? Wolves are very urban. We got, you know how I'm keeping a yikes meter that we luckily haven't had to use much so far? I think we're still on one singular yike, by the way. I should have kept a macro shot count of all the times when they're like, look, over there in the distance, and it's just something really small. This time it was a tiny version of that guy's hut. So anyway, they convince him to, they save Barbara from from him. Well, Barbara included. Barbara fucking pokes him with a hot poker because she's an S-tier character, like I've mentioned before. But they turn the tables on him and, you know, force him to take them to the cave where the demons are. And the demons just kind of turn out to be these automated men in medieval armor, because that's what demons look like. But we're jumping ahead. First of all, there's a bridge, and it's very funny. I think it's the same set that they were using in episode 2, or story number 2, I'll never get used to that, in the Daleks episode where they were in the caves and they had to jump the cave. Funny enough, apparently it's too wide to jump in this version, when it's definitely not. That bridge that's there, it can be crossed in like 2 strides. They do a lot of subtle camera work to try and cover this up, but at one point it does pan from one side to the other, and yeah, you could literally just like, you don't even need like a running start, you could just hop across it. It's very funny. And they're like, no, it's too wide to jump, later on, when the dude in the hut, I forget his name, Basil, when Basil inevitably drops the bridge out behind them. Anyway, the demons, who are really just automated knights, are guarding the key of Marinus, surprise surprise, and it looks like they tried to, I'm a little unclear on this, it looks like they tried to use stalactites that they've broken off from the ceiling, maybe, or stalagmites from the floor, I don't really know, it didn't show them breaking them off, but it seems like they're going to use those to try and get Susan to crawl across to the other side and then get the bridge back up for them. I didn't get the whole bring the bridge back up for them part. I thought they were just all going to try and crawl across the ice, so when they immediately cut to the next shot and they were just like running across the bridge, I was very confused. I thought the show legitimately wanted me to believe that the ice had frozen hard enough that it now resembled a wooden bridge, and for a second I was just reeling, but no, even classic Doctor Who doesn't go quite that far. I also like how you can clearly see that the stalactites are made of polystyrene, and when when Susan's crawling across them, all you can hear is the really loud squeaking of polystyrene too. I was wondering why they didn't just teleport out, but I guess I missed the scene where they all gave their teleport watches to the frickin' Basil dude, because I skipped over this part, but Ian traded his for some wolf skins. But either way, they fucking bust into his house, take the travel dials back. Then those knights, it's never explained how they got across the gap, but they sure did. They show up, break in, kill Basil, our heroes teleport away. Lo and behold, you've got your chapter of the Keys of Marinus sorted. It was alright. There you go. There's my review of the episode. It was alright. As usual, it ends with a tease of what's going to happen at the start of the next episode, where Ian gets bonked on the head, except not really, because this is 1963. He gets bonked near the head and then he falls unconscious and is promptly framed for, I guess, burglary from like a museum or something. Is it called burglary if it's a museum? That's usually called jewellery heisting. I don't fucking know what I'm talking about, sorry. The Keys of Marinus Part 5, The Sentence of Death. Arriving in Millennius, Ian is put on trial for murder. The Doctor takes his case. Quick little note here, but I like how Millennius is used as like a futuristic sounding term for an area to be named after. Whereas obviously now it's like, oh yeah, the Millennium, remember that? So yeah, we arrive in Millennius and Ian gets framed for murder and robbery and all that stuff. I didn't quite get the fact that someone was dead on the floor in front of him in the cliffhanger at the end of the last episode. I apologise, I would have mentioned it otherwise. But yeah, basically he's been framed, and this is in a society where you are guilty until proven innocent, so that's a fun subversion of what we already know. A fun dystopian version of the law which we already have, which is already so perfect and pure. The first thing the Doctor does, as his lawyer, I guess, he should be calling himself the lawyer from now on, is acquire 2 days of investigation time, which is something that he won very easily, and it was very weird. He was like, you know, I'm gonna need some time to investigate this, and they were just like, yeah, sure, okay. Court adjourned for 2 days. It was like, oh, that easy? Okay. Now, obviously, I'm not hugely well versed on the workings of how a court trial should go in real life, but I have played the first 3 chapters of the first Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney game, so, I mean, you tell me who's the expert here. Obviously, the identity of the murderer is not given to us at the start of this episode. I did think that the guard called Taran was immediately quite sus, just because, I mean, I try and solve these things on a meta basis, and when we get given like just snippets of like a boot of someone, it's clear to us that the identity is being hidden because we would recognize that person otherwise later on, or even beforehand, but I think in this case it's later on, right? And the first person we are introduced to is sitting there waiting for him to wake up, and I don't know, man, that just seems kind of like like the earliest character introduced to us in this story. If he was the killer all along, it would be the most obvious plot twist, right? It was nice to see the Doctor, by the way. It was our first time seeing him in about 2 episodes, so yeah, we've actually been a few episodes without him, and I'm trying to think if there's ever been an episode of modern Doctor Who without the Doctor in. There's definitely episodes where he's barely in it. Like, I think for a while they were doing 1 episode a season like that, so that's how we got Blink with the first Weeping Angels story. That's how we got that really, really bad story with the guy made of slime and the girl who got incorporated into him, and then she was a paving slab. We all know what I'm talking about, sadly, don't we? But yeah, no, he straight up doesn't show up for the last 2 episodes, so that's interesting. I mean, obviously it makes sense in terms of the plot. I'm just saying, like, in terms of constructing a story, I guess it helps that these are like multi-episode stories. So I like how obvious the guy is about having done it. Like, they just trick him by having another key of Marinus, and they're like, oh, you know, we found a key of Marinus because the killer showed it where it was, and they point at him, and he's like, but she can't have found it, I oop. He had a literal and I oop moment. It would have been bad enough if he did it once, but this guy did it twice. He also gets killed just before he can confess that he had an accomplice, and it's not entirely clear how he gets killed, but there's just like a bright flash of light and then he falls over dead. And I think the most unrealistic thing about that scene is everyone just stands there looking at him. They don't run away screaming because someone's, I think, like, the implication is he's been shot by some kind of laser weapon off screen by someone, or like that it was in someone's hand and they whipped it up their sleeve or something and we don't see that part. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, no one panics. They just kind of stand there looking at him. And then there is, to be fair, a second of silence, and then his wife screams. But for like, even after that, like, when one of the characters reacts, the rest still kind of don't. Not only that, but the court then decides, oh, okay, so the accomplice is clearly Ian. Ian is still guilty. It's a sham. It's all a sham. All the guards are in on it. I bet the court's in on it. Anyway, we got left on a cliffhanger on that note, so, shall we meander over to the final part of the Keys of Marinus? Oh, before we do, I completely forgot to mention we got left on a cliffhanger that Susan was being held hostage by whoever the accomplice was, and they were going to kill her. Dun dun dun. The Keys of Marinus, the final part. Doesn't have a name for some reason. The Doctor solves the murder mystery and finds the final missing key. Oh, I'm sorry, Tenvor, or whatever your name was, the chief investigator dude. He didn't do it. He's about the only official-looking dude who didn't do it. Turns out the wife was in on it, although I did start suspecting her shortly before it was revealed. Does that count? Does that make me 10,000 IQ? I don't think it does. Barbara even calls people like me out. She's like, maybe it was that Tenvor dude. After all, who would suspect the chief investigator? In a clear nod at the obvious plot twist that never happened. Damn you, S-tier Barbara. When they did go back to, I believe she was called... Oh no, I didn't write it down. Damn it. I take notes, by the way. Sandra? Something like that. By the time they got to her apartment, well, she was planning to kill Susan, but weirdly, they got in without making the door open. Like, they just... I assume she keeps her door locked, but even if she didn't, it would have made a noise. They just snuck up behind her and took the gun out of her hand. I can't get over the shot where the Doctor's sitting outside the courtroom. He looks so sad. He's so downcast. Sadly, BritBox doesn't let you, like, take clips or screenshots. Otherwise, I would for sure be incorporating them into these videos. I don't know how people do it. Maybe they just own the DVD versions and they take it from there. But I don't know, like, people were taking clips from Kenobi, which just aired today as of the time of recording, so I don't know how people get around that annoying DRM thing they do, but people do it. I don't know how though, so just take my word for it. It's a very funny looking shot. I like the quote, just doubts aren't enough for her to ask for a stay of execution. Well, they fucking should be. But of course this entire story is to or this entire episode, I guess, this episode and a half of this millennious place is supposed to showcase the dangers of having a legal system which is guilty until proven innocent. The Doctor even tells them that they should look into the works of, is his name Pirro? He wrote books on skepticism, and I think we get our first ever Doctor Who historical name drop. There might have been one before this, actually, on the fringes of my mind. I apologise if that's the case, where they're like, oh, I didn't know you read Pirro, and he's like, read him? Whatever are you talking about? I met the man. I just love that that's something that has continued throughout all of New Who, where he's just like, oh, who? Yeah, no, I met them. I wonder how many stories there have been where in the past the Doctor's mentioned meeting a historical celebrity and then later on has actually had a episode about it, thereby retconning that name drop. I already know that he's apparently been to one of the frost fairs on the River Thames 3 separate times, but to be fair, that doesn't have to contradict itself. That happened over multiple days. I thought that plot with the Vord was going to turn out to be like the Vord are actually in the right thing, but not really. It just kind of turned out to be that they were both in the wrong. Like, at first I thought the whole mind control thing wasn't going to be addressed at all, but they did give the Doctor a very quick, like 20-second speech at the end about how mind control wasn't the way to go, and that What's-Her-Face should continue... Sorry, I don't remember names very well, as you can probably tell by now. That the Daughter of Arbitan should continue his work, but not in that way, if you know what I mean. We've just spent 6 episodes with her. It was Sabifa? Sabifa, there we go. I'm not a terrible person after all. But yeah, there was a little scuffle with the Vord, and Ian very cleverly used a fake key of Marinus to make him blow it up, and then they all had to run away from the blowing up facility. Anyway, that was the keys of Marinus. So what did I think about it as a whole? Well, I mean, we've been talking about it for half an hour, and we've been talking about a screaming jungle, a frozen plain, a fucking dystopian system where everyone's being mind controlled, a dystopian law system where you're guilty until proven innocent. To be frank, the Keys of Marinus was all over the place. It was like a season of Doctor Who in and of itself. I think it got a little bit too far away from its main point to really be effective as a story. Like, for instance, like I said, with the whole thing with the Vord and trying to control their minds so they wouldn't attack anymore. Like, I feel like there was a deeper story there which didn't really get a chance to flourish. I appreciate the attempt of having like every week we go to a new location, but it's still part of the same overarching story, but I don't think that works when the overarching story doesn't have a satisfying story in itself, if you know what I mean. Next episode, we're going to have to keep an eye on that Yikes meter because we are going to the Time of the Aztecs. It is a 4-parter. Hang on, let me just count that again. Yes, it is a 4-parter, and every single episode has the warning, contains racial stereotypes. So, I will talk more about that at the start of the next episode, though. I don't just want to completely like spend the entire time shitting on it. It depends how bad the actual racial stereotypes are, so we'll see, I guess. But then I'm not an expert on the Aztecs, so I might miss a whole bunch of them. I might be the worst person to talk about this. As we approach the end of this episode, I just want to say thank you for putting up for microphone changes. I'm still not entirely happy with how it sounds. I think I need to do some tinkering with the volume, so I'm going to try and get that sorted out by the next episode. I think sometimes I still peak a little bit, even though it doesn't show me as peaking in the editor. There's something off about it, so I think I just need to lower the volume or maybe ease up on the mic a bit when I'm talking. So I'm still getting used to it, so thank you for sticking with me while I iron that out. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a like if you liked the video, leave a comment letting me know what you thought about this episode if you've seen it, or this story if you've seen it, anything I might have missed, any fun behind the scenes things I might have picked up on. Comments I'm really enjoying right now are people who actually watched this back in the day and are letting me know things of little facts from back then that I didn't know about, so keep those comments coming for sure, they make my day. And I'm going to close us out on some bloopers, so thank you for watching. Here's a blooper. Bloop. I like that Suman all. Suman? Who? Who's Suman? Bloop. So as for the whole do that over. Bloop. I did, no, I didn't. I didn't. You know what? Hello, blooper reel. I didn't. Bloop. In this episode, Ian wakes up, or Ian fucking do that over. Bloop. I do like the way this ties into the previous episode in the fact that Barbara and, not Barbara, fucking idiot. Bloop.